The playground hummed with the familiar sounds of childhood. Laughter, sneakers pounding against the blacktop, the rhythmic creak of swings soaring through the air. It was an ordinary midday recess at Evergreen Elementary, the kind where the biggest concern was who would claim the last spot on the monkey bars. Ms. Langley stood near the school entrance, sipping her lukewarm coffee, keeping a watchful eye on the children. Years of teaching had made her attuned to subtle shifts in the atmosphere, how excitement could spiral into chaos in an instant. But today, something else caught her attention. At first, it was just a rustle in the trees bordering the playground, the kind easily dismissed as a squirrel darting through the branches. Then came a hesitation in the air, as if even the wind had held its breath. A single voice broke through the chatter. "Miss Langley, what is that?" A cluster of children had paused near the slide, their gazes locked onto something just beyond the fence. Following their line of sight, she saw it, small, dark, and moving cautiously along the edge of the trees. Her breath hitched. It was a bear cub. For a moment, disbelief held her in place. This was Oregon, and black bears weren't unheard of in the surrounding forests, but never this close to school. The cub, no bigger than a Labrador, took a few tentative steps onto the grass. It sniffed the air, ears twitching, eyes darting around as if searching for something or someone, a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye. Some of the older kids had noticed and were inching forward, curiosity outweighing caution. Everyone back inside. Ms. Langley's voice was calm but firm, slicing through the moment like a bell. A chorus of groans and whispers followed. "But it's just a baby. Is it lost? Where's its mom?" That last question sent a jolt of urgency through her. Where was the mother? She knew enough about bears to understand that a cub wandering alone was a bad sign. Either the mother was nearby, hidden in the woods and dangerously protective, or something had happened to her. Neither option was comforting. The bear cub let out a soft, high-pitched whimper, a sound almost too human. It took another step forward, its small frame trembling. Something about its behavior sent an uneasy prickle down her spine. It wasn't just lost, it was desperate. Ms. Langley reached for her phone, fingers fumbling as she dialed the front office. "This is Ms. Langley," she said, keeping her voice steady. "We have a situation on the playground. Call animal control immediately." She didn't take her eyes off the cub. Something wasn't right. And as the children reluctantly shuffled toward the school doors, a sense of foreboding settled over her. Because deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. The moment the last child stepped inside, Ms. Langley exhaled, pressing the door shut behind her. The hallway was a stark contrast to the crisp air outside. Fluorescent lights buzzing, the muffled hum of classrooms continuing their lessons, oblivious to the situation unfolding beyond the playground. Principal Owens was already approaching, concern etched into his features. "Animal control's been called," he said. "What exactly are we dealing with?" "A bear cub," Ms. Langley replied, lowering her voice. "But something's off. It's alone, acting strange." The principal frowned. "Strange how?" She hesitated, struggling to put the feeling into words. "It's not behaving like a normal wild animal. It's too comfortable near people. And the way it's moving, it looks scared, but not of us." A few feet away, students whisper among themselves, their energy buzzing with barely contained excitement. The younger ones press their faces against the glass of the side door, eager for another glimpse of the cub. A group of fourth graders were already speculating wildly. What if it's from the zoo? Maybe it escaped from some rich person's house. "My uncle says if you see a cub, the mom is right behind you." Ms. Langley gently steered them away from the window. "All right, everyone back to class. This isn't something to crowd around for." A chorus of disappointed sighs followed, but the students obeyed, their footsteps fading into the depths of school. As the hallway emptied, Principal Owens ran a hand down his face. "Let's keep the kids indoors for now, just to be safe. I'll call district security." Ms. Langley nodded but didn't move. She glanced back toward the playground through the window. The cub was still there, pacing. Its small, dark shape contrasted sharply against the bright green grass. It wasn't trying to run, wasn't trying to hide. Instead, it lingered, glancing toward the building in a way that almost seemed intentional. A shiver crawled up her spine. This wasn't just a lost animal. It was here for a reason, and that realization filled her with a quiet, growing dread. Ms. Langley couldn't shake the unease settling in her chest. The cub wasn't acting like a typical wild animal. There was no frantic scrambling, no panicked attempts to flee. Instead, it paced in restless circles, pausing every few moments to look toward the building. Toward her. She knew enough about animal behavior to recognize fear, but this wasn't fear of humans. It was something else. She watched as the cub lifted its head and let out a soft, almost pitiful whimper. It wasn't the deep, guttural sound of a bear defending itself. It sounded more like a cry for help. A student's voice piped up from behind her. Is it looking for someone? She turned to see Oliver Marsh, one of her quieter students, standing by the window. He had been unusually invested in the situation. His small hands pressed against the glass, eyes locked onto the cub. Ms. Langley hesitated before answering. Maybe. Oliver chewed on his lip, then added, I don't think it's dangerous. She wanted to believe that, but something was gnawing at the back of her mind. The school's janitor, Mr. Reese, approached, wiping his hands on a rag. Animal control says they'll be here soon, he said. Then, squinting at the cub, he frowned. Huh, that's odd. What is? She asked. Mr. Reese pointed at the cub's neck. See that? It's got something on it. Ms. Langley followed his gaze. It took her a moment, but then she saw it. A thin, dark collar, barely visible against the cub's thick fur. Her pulse quickened. Wildlife officials sometimes tag animals for tracking, but this collar looked different. It wasn't bright or marked with visible ID. It was small, black, and snug against the animal's neck, almost like a pet collar. The thought sent a ripple of discomfort through her. Why would a wild bear cub have a collar like that? The cub whimpered again, its restless pacing growing more erratic. It lifted a paw and scratched at the collar, as if trying to rid itself of it. Ms. Langley felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't normal. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this cub hadn't just wandered onto school grounds by accident. It had been put here. But by who? And more importantly, why? Ms. Langley's heart drummed against her ribs. Every instinct told her to stay inside, to wait for animal control, to let the professionals handle this. But that collar, it wasn't right. Something about it felt deliberately placed, intentional. The cub wasn't just lost. It was trying to tell them something. She glanced at Principal Owens, who was on the phone with district security, his brow furrowed. Mr. Reese lingered by the door, watching the cub with narrowed eyes. I need to get a closer look, she murmured. Mr. Reese's head snapped toward her. You sure about that? No, she wasn't. But she was going to do it anyway. Before anyone could stop her, she pushed open the side door and stepped onto the playground. The cool air hit her immediately, sending a shiver down her spine. The cub stilled at the sound of the door, its small body tense, head tilting slightly as if recognizing her presence. Ms. Langley moved slowly, careful not to startle it. Hey there, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The cub didn't run. It didn't growl or bare its teeth. Instead, it did something that made her breath catch in her throat. It took a hesitant step forward. Then another, closer, not like a wild animal afraid of humans, but like something that had been around them before. Ms. Langley knelt, her hands hovering just above the ground. The cub was now only a few feet away, its dark eyes locked onto hers. Then she saw it. Up close, the collar looked even more unusual. It wasn't a standard leather or nylon strap. It was sleek, almost metallic, with a small, rectangular tag attached. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't a simple tracking device. She reached out slowly, fingers brushing against the cool metal tag. There was something engraved on it. She squinted, trying to make out the letters, and then she froze, because what she saw wasn't a name or an ID number. It was a message. Help us. Ms. Langley's fingers trembled as she traced the engraved letters. Help us. The message was unmistakable, deliberate, urgent. Her breath hitched. Someone had placed this collar on the cub. Someone had wanted it to be found. But why? Who was us? She barely registered the sound of school door swinging open behind her. "Ms. Langley," Principal Owens called, his voice sharp with concern. "Step back. Animal control is almost here." She didn't move. The cub met her gaze, its dark eyes reflecting something deeper than fear, something desperate. She could feel it, as if the small creature were willing her to understand. "There's a message," she murmured, half to herself. "Someone put this collar on the cub. Someone wants help." Mr. Reese stepped forward, squinting at the tag. His face paled. "You gotta be kidding me," he muttered. This is messed up." Ms. Langley carefully lifted the tag, turning it over. More words. "Near the river. Time is running out." Her breath came faster now. Whoever left this message didn't just need help. They were in immediate danger. She shot a glance toward the woods bordering the playground. The river wasn't far, maybe half a mile away, tucked behind a thick line of trees. It was a well-known spot for hiking, but also secluded enough that someone in trouble could easily go unnoticed. "We have to call the police," she said quickly. Standing up. "Already on it," Principal Owen said. Phone pressed his ear. His expression had shifted from concern to something more serious. "We're not taking chances with this." The cub whined again, shifting on its paws. It wasn't leaving. It was waiting. Ms. Langley's gut twisted. This animal hadn't stumbled onto school grounds by accident. It had been sent. And if the message was real, someone out there didn't have much time left. The distant wail of sirens broke through the silence, growing louder as animal control and local law enforcement approached. But Ms. Langley knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just about a lost bear cub. This was something much bigger, something far more chilling. Red and blue lights flashed against the school's brick walls as two police cruisers pulled up beside the animal control vehicle. Officers stepped out quickly, scanning the area, while a uniformed wildlife officer carefully approached Cub. The children inside pressed against the windows, their curiosity barely contained. Ms. Langley barely noticed them. Her focus was on the police officer striding toward her, Sergeant Daniel Foster, a seasoned officer with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "You're the one who found the message?" he asked, glancing at the cub. Ms. Langley nodded and held up the tag. "It says, 'Help us. Near the river. Time is running out.'" Sergeant Foster took the small piece of metal, turning it over in his gloved hands. His brows knitted together. "Strange way to ask for help," he muttered. "It's not a joke," she said quickly, reading the skepticism in his eyes. "That cub came straight here, as if it knew we'd find it." A second officer, a younger woman named Officer Riley, frowned as she peered at the message. Could be some kind of prank. Ms. Langley shook her head. "I don't think so. The way it's behaving, it's not wild. And why would someone go through the trouble of putting a collar on a bear just for a joke?" Sergeant Foster exhaled, glancing toward the tree line. The river wasn't far, but it was dense territory, easy to get lost in. "Animal control will take the cub," he finally said. "We'll check out the river. But if this turns out to be a false alarm..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Ms. Langley's jaw tightened. Every instinct told her this was real, that someone, somewhere, needed them to move fast. The cub let out a small, distressed sound as the wildlife officer gently guided it toward a transport crate. It resisted at first, looking back at Ms. Langley one last time before disappearing inside. She turned to Sergeant Foster. "I'm coming with you." He hesitated. "Ma'am, this is police business. I was the first person to find the message. I know these woods better than you think. And if there's a chance someone is in danger, I need to see this through." Foster studied her for a long moment before finally nodding. "Stay close." Ms. Langley swallowed hard. Whatever they were about to find near the river, she had a feeling it wouldn't be easy to forget. The crunch of leaves beneath their boots was the only sound as Ms. Langley followed Sergeant Foster and Officer Riley through the dense woods. The bare branches above twisted against the gray sky, casting jagged shadows along the forest floor. The river wasn't far. She knew that, but something about this walk, this silence, felt different, urgent. Ms. Langley kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the bear cub trailing behind them. But of course, it was gone now, loaded into the wildlife transport. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that its presence had been more than coincidence. Foster's radio crackled to life. "Dispatch to Unit 17. Any update on the search?" "We're approaching the river now," he replied, his voice steady but clipped. Ms. Langley's pulse quickened as the sound of rushing water grew louder. A few more steps, and the trees thinned, revealing the wide stretch of the river. The current moved lazily, reflecting the overcast sky, but the banks were steep, lined with exposed roots and damp earth. Something about the scene felt wrong. Then she saw it. Half hidden among the trees, just at the edge of the riverbank, was a small, abandoned campsite. A tent, its fabric torn and sagging. A fire pit cold and scattered with ashes. And beside it, Ms. Langley's breath hitched. A backpack, bright blue, child-sized. She took a shaky step forward. "Oh, my God!" Officer Riley moved first, carefully picking up the bag and unzipping it. Inside were a few crumpled granola bar wrappers, a water bottle, and a small stuffed bear. Ms. Langley's stomach twisted. Foster's jaw tightened. This just got serious. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch! We got signs of a missing person. Possibly a child. Requesting immediate search support." The response was almost instant. "Copy that. Sending additional units and K-9 support." Ms. Langley barely heard the words. She was staring at the footprints near the tent. Small ones, leading toward the river. But there were others, too. Larger, deeper, and then her breath caught. Something had been dragged. A long, uneven groove in the mud, disappearing into the thick brush. She turned to Sergeant Foster, her voice barely a whisper. "We're not alone out here." Sergeant Foster's expression darkened as he followed Ms. Langley's gaze to disturbed earth. The drag marks were unmistakable. Something or someone had been pulled through the mud, and it hadn't been long ago. Officer Riley dropped the backpack, already reaching for a flashlight. "That's not animal tracks," she muttered. "That's human." Ms. Langley's throat went dry. She turned toward the woods, scanning the dense undergrowth. Every rustling leaf, every shifting shadow seemed to breathe with silent, unseen danger. Foster didn't hesitate. He pulled his radio to his mouth again. "Dispatch! We have a possible abduction. I repeat, possible abduction. We need K-9 and search teams ASAP." The reply crackled back. "ETA 5 minutes. Hold position if possible." Hold position? No. Ms. Langley couldn't just stand there. Not when there might be a child in danger. She took a step toward the trail, but Foster's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet," he warned. She met his gaze. "That's exactly why we can't waste time." Foster hesitated, just for a moment, then exhaled sharply. "Fine, but stay behind us." They followed the drag marks, the forest growing eerily silent around them. Even the birds had stopped chirping. The trees loomed taller, their tangled roots twisting across the path like grasping fingers. Then a sound, a muffled noise, faint, barely audible over the wind. Ms. Langley's heart pounded. "Did you hear that?" Riley froze, tilting her head. Then there was again a whimper. Foster motioned for silence, drawing his sidearm as they pushed deeper into the trees. The whimper turned into something else, soft, trembling sobs. And then a voice, small, frightened. "Help, please." Ms. Langley's breath caught. There, half hidden beneath a fallen tree trunk, was a child. A girl, no older than 8. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her clothes torn and damp. She clutched her knees to her chest, shaking violently. Ms. Langley dropped to her knees beside her, hands outstretched. "Hey, sweetheart, you're safe now." The girl flinched, pressing herself tighter against the tree. "He's still out there," she whispered. Ms. Langley felt ice crawl up her spine. Foster's grip tightened on his gun. "Who?" The girl's eyes darted past them, into the trees. "The man who took me." The wind shifted, rustling the branches overhead. Somewhere in the woods, too close for comfort, a twig snapped. Ms. Langley's blood ran cold. They were not alone. The snap of the twig sent a ripple of fear through the group. Sergeant Foster stiffened, raising his gun toward the trees. Officer Riley followed, her flashlight beam slicing through the thick undergrowth. Ms. Langley instinctively pulled the little girl closer, shielding her small frame. "It's okay," she whispered, though her pulse pounded against her ribs. "We've got you." The girl was trembling. Her tiny fingers gripped Ms. Langley's sleeve like a lifeline. Then another sound, a slow, deliberate footstep. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. Foster motioned silently, signaling them to stay low. He moved cautiously, his boots pressing softly into the damp earth as he scanned the darkness. Riley followed, her breath controlled but tense. Ms. Langley held the girl tightly, her mind racing. Who was this man? And why had he taken her? Then the girl spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "He had the bear." Ms. Langley's stomach dropped. "What?" "The baby bear," the girl murmured, eyes wide with fear. "He was carrying it. He said if I ran, he'd hurt it." "Oh, God!" The cub wasn't just lost, it had escaped. It had led them here. Foster's radio crackled, shattering the silence. "Unit 17, backup is 2 minutes out." Then movement. A dark figure darted between the trees. Foster turned sharply, gun raised. "Police?" "Stop." No response. Just the sound of leaves crunching under fast-moving feet. He took off running. Riley was right behind him. Ms. Langley's breath caught. "Stay here," she told the girl firmly, then grabbed her flashlight and took off after them. The chase tore through the forest. Branches whipped against her arms. The flashlight beam bounced wildly as she sprinted, adrenaline drowning out exhaustion. Up ahead, Foster was fast, his gun trained on the moving shadow. Riley shouted, "Freeze! Hands up!" But the figure didn't stop. Then a stumble, a cry. The suspect fell, tumbling down a steep embankment near the river. Foster and Riley skidded to a halt at the edge, gun still raised. Ms. Langley caught up, panting hard. She aimed her flashlight downward. There, at the bottom of the ravine, lay a man. His clothes were filthy, his face obscured by a tangled beard and wild hair. He gasped, trying to push himself up, but pain contorted his face. And wrapped tightly around his arm was a chain. Ms. Langley's eyes widened. The chain wasn't attached to him. It was attached to something else, something buried in the leaves. Foster took a step forward, his voice firm. "Don't move." The man let out a dry, rasping laugh. Then he looked up, meeting their eyes, and what he said next sent a shiver down Ms. Langley's spine. "You shouldn't have come here." The man's ragged breaths filled the silence. He shifted, wincing as the chain rattled against his arm. Foster tightened his grip on his gun. "Who are you?" The man let out a low, dry chuckle. "Doesn't matter." His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. "You don't understand what you've walked into." Ms. Langley's skin prickled. She shone her flashlight lower, illuminating the rusted links wrapped around the man's wrist. The chain extended into the undergrowth, disappearing beneath damp leaves. Officer Riley stepped closer. "What's at the other end of that chain?" The man's smile faded. His sunken eyes flicked toward the river. "Something you don't want to find." Foster wasn't amused. "Where's the kid's family?" he demanded. "Where did you take her from?" The man coughed, spitting into the dirt. "Didn't take her. Tried to save her." His gaze sharpened. "But now you've ruined everything." Ms. Langley's pulse pounded in her ears. "What do you mean?" The man sighed, shifting his weight. "The bear found you, didn't it?" A chill ran down her spine. The way he said it, like the cub had been on a mission. Foster glanced toward Riley. "Cuff him." Riley pulled out her restraints, moving cautiously. But the moment she touched the chain, the man thrashed violently. "No, don't touch it." His voice cracked with sheer terror. Riley jumped back, hand on her holster. "Jesus, what the hell is wrong with you?" The man was breathing hard now, his body trembling. He looked past them, toward the forest, as if expecting something to step out of the darkness. "You don't understand," he whispered. "The chain isn't mine." Ms. Langley's heart lurched. "What?" The man swallowed hard. "I was chained here, left as bait." A gust of wind rattled the branches. The river gurgled softly behind them. Foster's face darkened. "By who?" The man's gaze met his, and in it, Ms. Langley saw something that terrified her more than anything else that had happened that night. Pure, unfiltered fear. His voice was barely a breath. "They're coming." Then, from deep in the forest, a sound, not the wind, not an animal, something worse. A slow, deliberate clink, like metal dragging against stone. And then, in the distance, another chain rattled. The sound sent ice through Miss Langley's veins. It was faint, so faint that, for a moment, she questioned if she had imagined it. But the look on the man's face told her otherwise. His breath hitched, eyes wide with dread. Every muscle in his body locked in terror. Clink. It came again. Closer this time. Foster lifted his gun, scanning the dark woods. Riley's fingers tightened around her holster, her breath coming fast and shallow. Ms. Langley couldn't move. She clutched the little girl's stuffed bear in her trembling fingers, heart pounding like a drum. Then movement. The undergrowth rustled. Leaves crackled under deliberate, slow footsteps. A shape emerged from the trees. Ms. Langley's breath caught. It was tall, too tall, its outline barely human, its posture unnatural. The darkness clung to it, swallowing detail. But the chains were real. They dragged as it stepped forward, glinting under the moonlight. Foster took a step back. "Stay where you are." The thing didn't stop. It didn't hesitate. It just moved. The man on the ground began to shake, murmuring something over and over, his voice barely a whisper. Ms. Langley strained to hear. Not supposed to be seen, not supposed to be seen. Riley pulled out her radio, her voice tight with fear. "Dispatch, we need." The static cut out. Silence. Then a low, deep sound rumbled through the trees. Not a growl, not a voice. Something worse. The little girl whimpered. "It's him." Ms. Langley turned sharply. "Who?" "The one who took me." Her stomach twisted. "That's not a man." The thing lurched forward. Foster fired. The gunshot shattered the night, but the bullet did nothing. It just disappeared, swallowed by the thing's shifting, unnatural form. Then the chain in the man's hand snapped free. The man let out a strangled sob. "Run." Ms. Langley didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed the little girl and sprinted. Foster and Riley were right behind her. The man didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the darkness, accepting whatever was about to come. They ran. The forest blurred past them. Branches lashed at their arms. The ground sloped beneath their feet. The river's edge came into view. Then lights. Headlights. The cavalry had arrived. K-9 units, search teams, flashing red and blue. Officers poured into the woods. Ms. Langley collapsed to her knees, clutching the little girl close. She turned back toward the trees. But there was nothing. No shadow. No man. No chains. Just the wind, whispering through the trees. The officers searched for hours. They found the abandoned campsite. The footprints. The man's chain, broken and rusted. But they never found him. And when Ms. Langley looked at the little bear cub, safe now in wildlife custody, she couldn't shake the feeling. It hadn't been lost. It had been running. And whatever it had run from was still out there.